You're listening to Ages and Stages, where womanhood gets real across every decade. 3 women, 3 life stages, 1 honest conversation. Each episode, we break down one topic, from relationships to career, to motherhood and identity, and how it evolves across the decades. If you've ever wondered whether you're the only one figuring things out, you're not. This is Ages and Stages.
Welcome back to Ages and Stages and to another episode where we talk about the honest truth, real life, real struggles, and everything in between. We are your hosts. I'm Wendie.
I'm Lindsey.
And I'm Emma.
So, Emma, the last time we got together, you talked a little bit about the emotional scoreboard. And I thought that would be a good topic to go back and maybe revisit a little bit in depth, because I think that there's a lot of people out there that actually kind of do that emotional scoreboard thing, sometimes with knowing and sometimes without knowing, not even realizing that they're engaging in that emotional scoreboard, spectrum. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to ask you, Emma, what expectations have you placed on yourself because you believe everyone else is doing better than you?
Yeah, I think the emotional scoreboard for me, especially in comparison to other people, is really real in my age group. And maybe not just my age group, but something that I've noticed is there's a lot of people putting themselves out there online. They're putting their best selves out there. And there's a big push to look your best and to buy the newest thing and have the newest thing. So for me, I feel like I'm constantly comparing myself and keeping that score of this person is doing better than me in this way, or maybe their status or their house, or just something to find where I make myself feel smaller compared to them, because I've put this image in my mind. I check the scoreboard for them that they're doing something that I'm not. Therefore, I must be doing something wrong. So that's pretty huge. I think the other way that I keep score, and I didn't even realize it until I kind of saw this emotional score, or invisible scoreboard name. It really just kind of like hit me. I was like, oh yeah, that's what I've been doing, especially as like a first time mom. I remember the first 6 months, and even sometimes now I'll catch myself doing it, but I would mentally tick off the things that I'm doing that my partner's not doing. And like, it would add to this feeling of resentment and anger and frustration. And then it didn't always come out pretty. You keep that scoreboard until you finally just, blow your top, and your partner's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So sometimes it's tough because you just want them to see that scoreboard. You want it to become visible. You think it's so visible to them because it's so visible to you, and when it's really not.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So it's tough. I don't know. How about you, Wendie?
Well, for me, as being in my 50s, I think that there's still that emotional scoreboard might look a little bit different because, like I've kind of gone through some of those transitions with the first of everything, but I think that emotional scoreboard comes into play mostly like within the context of friendships. What we are talking in the last episode about, like how we evolve and change, like over the decades. And one of the things that I mentioned is the authenticity of relationships. And Angie, your mom, talked a little bit about, like, no, we don't have time for, drama within the context. But that emotional scoreboard in my mind's eye is, like, how do we show up for one another? Like with friendships, if am I the only one that's making the effort, because in my mind's eye, it should be, mutual. There should be some give and take instead of, like me doing all the planning or maybe somebody else doing all the planning. Like that's where I see an emotional scoreboard showing up. And in career, I see emotional scoreboards with people in in our age, within the context, and I don't think that that's just mutually exclusive, like to the 50s. Like perhaps within the context of the world of work, that emotional scoreboard can show up with who's doing what, who's putting in the time, who's doing the work, and is everybody contributing, or am I the one that's doing more than everybody else? In relationships, like for me, myself personally, I don't have a lot of that emotional scoreboard that's coming into play as much anymore. Like we don't have, like kids active, that we're raising in the home anymore. It's probably projects. And I'm not going to lie, Todd does most of the projects around the farm. I'll help. I will help where I can. But maybe he does the emotional scoreboard a little bit more than what I do, because I know my limits within the context of it. But my presumption is that based on some of the comments that my boys make, that there's an emotional scoreboard that is that's at play when they're just like, oh yeah, you do this for Steven and not, like not me, or you do this for Blaine and not me, or you do this for Ryan, like in words like that. I think that there's a little bit of an emotional scoreboard when you're a parent to adult children, what that emotional scoreboard might look like on you. Not that you're doing it, but that they may be doing it to you. How about for you, Lindsey?
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of doing that to my parents. I definitely keep an invisible scoreboard between me and my siblings, and then with Brian and the kids that live with us, things around the house. And for a long time, there was like nothing Ryan could do about it. Like T only wanted me, but it didn't matter. It was still ticking. It's like, well, I've done this, 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 and this, and now I'm feeding the baby. And it's like, well, he really can't, because she's not going to accept it coming from him instead of me. So it's definitely a big thing I've noticed and have clocked probably within like the last 2 years. I notice I do it at work too. Like you were saying with careers, I'll be like, okay, well, I've done all of these things today. What do you mean you want me to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily fair. So I try to keep it in check now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that the emotional scoreboard is a mental record of what we inadvertently keep track of. And sometimes it can be some of the things that we've mentioned, like what we have contributed versus another person, what we believe others owe us. Sometimes we get caught up into some of that, how much effort we have invested into something, like I gave an example of friendships, or whether people have met our expectations, which is really interesting. Like I've been thinking in terms of, this emotional scoreboard as I've been working with patients in the last couple of weeks. And one of the things that I have learned in listening to individuals is that there's this idea that sometimes we can turn that emotional scoreboard onto ourselves. And sometimes that's by way of expectations that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, I think I can speak to that. Having that scoreboard on yourself. I think I put myself in a really high pedestal, not in the fact that I think so highly of myself, but I put all these expectations on myself every day to do a lot of things and a lot of things well. And when I don't, I'm really hard on myself. So I think I'm constantly keeping score. And it seems like as time goes on, like the number of things to put on myself keeps getting higher and higher and higher. So it's tough to manage. I mean, being a mom and being a partner and being a person and taking care of my health and being social, there's all these factors that contribute to that scoreboard. And where you kind of give yourself a grade, right? Or otherwise I do. I give myself kind of a grade per se. At the end of the day, I'm like, man, today I was just not there. Like I had such a bad day. I didn't get this, and this done, or I didn't do this. And then I'm just so tough on myself. And sometimes I think I deserve a higher grade than I give myself.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, Emma. I do the same thing. I mean, there's nights I'll sit here and be like, wow. And I'll tell myself, like, I was a shitty mom today. And it's like, no, you weren't. Like, just because I didn't take her to do some, super crafty, intricate thing does not make me a shitty mom. Like, I was still there for her emotionally, physically, like anything she needed, she was still taken care of. But because I didn't do that extra little bit for her, I knocked myself down about it.
Yeah, me too. I'm like, oh my gosh, I was such a bad mom. We didn't, like you kind of like this said, like the crafty stuff and like the extra activities. And sometimes I'm like, oh man, I had to work so hard because I work from home and my kid stays at home with me. And I'm like, man, he's watching Elmo so often today. And like, I back up. I'm like, I'm not a bad mom just because he watched Elmo today. Like you gotta have a come to Jesus moment. Like it'll be okay. Like I think about all the times where my parents were super busy as a kid and they turned on PBS Kids or whatever, and I'm fine. Like, I don't, that's not a big deal. So it's like sometimes you just got to think back and like, okay, it's not that big of a deal,
Yeah. Do any of you ever, does that emotional scoreboard ever have you conclude that you failed at something? I see that a lot with conversations that I have with people, that I failed at this, I failed at that, I'm not good enough. That's where that self-judgment comes in because of those expectations, by way of that emotional scoreboard that you're turning onto yourself.
Not really, because I think mine gets to me beforehand. Mine will almost keep me from doing things because I don't want to fail at them. And I know I will be judging myself so harshly. So it's like I don't even try because I'm worried about the scoreboard.
But what if you don't quite get that? Like you try really hard to do that, but then it shows up anyway. And at the end, like you get caught up into that sort of failure complex.
Yeah, I try not to dwell in the failure complex because I don't know. I'm such a weirdo. Like I said, I'll be so scared of failing. But then if I did fail, I'm like, well, I tried. Like, I don't know why I was so afraid to try, because if I do fail, I'm kind of like, well, oh, well, there it was.
I try and talk to people a lot about that I work with, because a lot of them really get caught inside of that failure complex because of the expectations and that turnaround invisible scoreboard that they turn on to themselves. And, like I put it this way, like, when do you learn the most? Do you learn the most, like when you just have success after success after success? Or do you actually learn the most when things don't quite work in accordance to plan? Then what happens if failure is just a part of that process? Would that make a difference? In the therapy session, a lot of them will be like, yeah, that would make a difference. But, like the reality of the situation is there's so many people that struggle with that, and it's really hard for them to overcome. So, like it was really nice to hear, Lindsey, how you've really learned, like through, self-discipline. I just don't go there. I have learned that I can't go there. There's no need to go there. It just ends up adding a lot of noise that I don't need.
Well, that's very nice to hear, but if I were being completely honest, I don't know that it's necessarily like a healthy, I don't need to go there. I think a lot of times too, I'll be like, well, I tried, but it wasn't my fault that I failed because of this, and this, So I don't know that it's always healthy, but
well, like sometimes it kind of presents differently from person to person. That's for sure. Yeah.
Well, and it definitely depends on the circumstance too. There's sometimes where really, there's nothing I could have done about it. So no, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to let it go and go on about my life. And other times it's like, well, maybe I do need to reflect on that a little bit.
Yeah. What about for you, Emma?
I get into this habit of life or death. in like the smallest amount of situations. Like it's almost like I put this pressure on myself, like that I'm being judged. Like everyone who's perfect at whatever I'm doing is watching me and judging me, you know? So I'm really tough on myself to fail. I don't like to fail. I'm kind of a perfectionist in that way. I'm sort of like Lindsay too, though. If I fail, I'm like, whatever. Like I don't care. But in the moment, you know, nobody wants to fail. It's much easier to reflect and be like, oh yeah, whatever. But then in the moment, be like, yes, I'm not gonna fail. Um, I don't know. I've always been a person that's determined to do things right, and I've been a hardworking person my whole life. But yeah, I always feel like I'm like, if I don't do it 100%, that I shouldn't be doing it at all, which puts a lot of pressure just to try new things, do mundane tasks. And it's, ironic because, my boyfriend, Steven, is not that way. Like he will just go do anything, try new things, meet new people, whatever the case is. Nowhere in the world, or else, I mean, he looks like it. Like nowhere in the world. It could be like no one's watching. It's been like, it looks like he's done it a million times. But for me, like I said, it's like I have all these eyes on me when I really don't. So that's kind of a mental rut that I get in. And it's hard to get out of. I don't know. How about you, Wendie?
You know, I think that I've had to learn over the years to, you know, give myself a leeway and grace. And the other thing that I've learned is that there's a difference between high standards and expectations. I personally don't think that there's anything wrong with having a high standard that you set for yourself. And I think that there's a lot of value, but it's when those expectations, you know, come into play that I see that, you know, that really creates problems because, you know, at least in my history, that's where I would be really hard at myself. And when I was younger, I'd be like, oh, this is an okay thing to do because that just makes me work harder and I become smarter and I won't make those mistakes again because I won't allow myself to make a mistake. And then I'm just like, wait a minute, you know, like I got to change the way that I understand these things and how sometimes, you know, like, we end up meshing all of these things together and they're very, very different. Like I've had always high standards, you know, like for myself, but if I don't attach an expectation to them when it doesn't quite work out in accordance to plan, then, you know, like that emotional scoreboard, as I reflect, hasn't shown up as much. And I can let things go and I can provide that grace to myself and say, hey, you know, like, you know, that didn't work out, you know, and I won't do that again, you know. And sometimes you have to learn the hard way because there's no way to know everything that you need to know and get it right the first time around. You know, that's just my experience anyway. Lindsay, what about you?
I think that that was just a really good point, the difference between the standards and the expectations, because that's where I find the most scorekeeping is with the expectations versus the standards.
Yeah, another thing that I get caught up in as well, is like the emotional and social aspect of it. Like I remember, being a kid and being very in tune about, um, people's emotions around me, like my parents or my friends. Like I was always very observant and always very, I wanted to know what people were feeling, and I was always the one to make them feel better or to point out if they were feeling sad or mad or whatever. And I also, in return, didn't want people to see me show any emotion or, um, look bad or look embarrassing. So when it comes to trying new things and putting yourself out there and failures, I think for me, a lot of times I'm so nervous about looking dumb or embarrassing myself. I think failing at home is one thing in front of my family, but going out and doing things that I'm comfortable with in a social setting is a lot higher risk for me because there's people involved. There's people seeing me being vulnerable. Even like this podcast is huge for me because I don't like being perceived. I don't like being the center of attention. So it's like things like that are kind of tough. So I don't know. I'm glad I'm here though. Glad you guys are here.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. The podcast is huge for me. I don't want to, I would never have thought I'd be sitting here on camera on the internet, because it is not my thing to be the center of attention. And I was going to say too, like back to the being a kid, like I almost rebelled against the standards and expectations because I didn't want to fail to meet them.
Mhm.
So like, a lot of girls especially would get up and do their hair and makeup and things for school. And I would intentionally go to school in PJs and my glasses because I didn't want to do my hair and makeup and still not be, the standard or the expectation at school. So it's like, why even try?
Mm-hmm.
I've never thought of it that way. I'm just thinking back to when I was younger and girls like you, like there were girls like you all the time, but I was like, man, like they just don't care. They're so cool. They just are totally themselves. I've just never thought of it in that perspective. Like, oh, they just don't want to. I mean, maybe that's not all like you, but I've never thought about it that perspective ever. That's so interesting. Were you someone that rebelled against social norms, or did you show up every day with, hair and makeup? Like what was your experience?
Like I looked at hair and makeup as being a personal choice. I didn't do it, like to show up for other people. I did it because I liked it for myself. But I would have to say that I was more like Lindsey in that I didn't really ever care what other people thought of me. Maybe it's because, like there was mild bullying, like of me when I was growing up. I mean, I had red hair. I know it's hard to believe, but I had, like carrot top, copper penny, red hair. And I think I shared my last name, like my maiden name was Hornback. And so how many ways could you just destroy and make fun of somebody, like with a last name like that? I was so glad to try and get away from that name, but now I miss it. Like I haven't been a Hornback since I was, like in my early 20s, and I kind of miss that now. But there is so many different things that kind of played into that. And I wasn't the most athletic. I tried. And I hate to tell you this, I love to sing. Like Steven, my youngest, loves to sing too. But I'm different from Steven because I can't hold a note. Like I'm the only one that I know of that has been, like almost kicked off of a church choir. That's how bad my singing voice is. Like, I mean, seriously, that's an achievement in within itself. Not that it was like, you're not good enough. It's like, there's so many other ways that you can volunteer, I'm like, oh, message. I can't sing. So, but I can with my grandkids. Like I love to sing them to sleep, or maybe they're just humoring me. Maybe I'm so bad. I have no idea. Maybe I'm so bad that they're just like, yeah, I'm just going to go to sleep now because if I go to sleep, you'll stop. I have no idea. But one thing that I think is also really, really important to think in terms of assumptions. Like I've really gotten into this, like the last couple of years working with people. I am just amazed at how many assumptions we make. And most of the time when we make an assumption, we're in error. It's incorrect. I assumed that Todd knew that we were going to leave at 9:00 on Friday. And I failed to communicate that with him, and so I'm ready to go. And Todd's just being Todd, doing whatever Todd likes to do. And I feel my, like my temperature rising, internally. And it's like, and he's like, well, what's the problem? I'm like, we're supposed to go. Well, when were you going to tell me that? Well, I assumed that, you heard me, or that you knew that when I said, hey, we need to take off, that meant in the morning, early, like we always go around 9:00. Nope.
Yeah, I don't assume that Ryan knows anything about our schedule ever. Ever. I
Steven too. He has no clue.
3 times, and I am still going to need to wake him up at a certain time and be like, you need to be ready by this time.
Do you guys ever make any assumptions, or what kind? Maybe a better question is, what kind of assumptions do you make? Because everybody makes them.
I assume a lot of the times that people are as observant about emotions as I am. So when I'm really pissed off or angry or off put or whatever, I expect people close to me to pick up on that because I pick up on that easily with them. So like if I'm just like fuming, I'm upset, I feel like I'm giving visible signs that I'm upset, like I'm short, I'm not talking. And I'm like, he's like, for Steven, I'm like, he's gotta know. Like he's gotta ask me what's wrong. Like I'm waiting. I'm assuming that he's gonna like, oh, what's going on? How can I help? But he's like, how's your day? Like he's all bubbly and it just goes right over his head. So that's a big one for me is I assume everyone in my life is as observant and attuned to emotional well-being of others that I am to other people, which some people are just not wired that way. I have always been wired that way. I always look for signs of people, how they're feeling, how they're doing. I'm always asking about it. And some people are just not like that. Some people are just like happy go lucky. Like you have to physically tell them like, hey, I am not doing well or I'm doing well for them to get it. And my partner is that way. And it's still hard for me not to assume that and for me to actually tell him because to me it's so obvious, right? To me it's so crystal clear, and to him it's just not at all. So that's tough. But I've learned a lot. You know, we've been together for 8 years, but it can be hard some days because I'm like, how do you not know? You know, I don't know how do you guys handle that?
Ryan's pretty good on picking up on like my moods, I guess. But the one thing I'm really bad about assuming is that he knows what I need. Like,
Yeah,
if
that's
I
a
need
big one.
him to do the dishes or I need him to take tea for a little while, I need him to step in. I just assume he knows that. You know, it's not me saying, hey, could you help me with this? I just assume that he knows that I need assistance, and then I'm mad that he is not helping me.
Yeah. You know, like I think that I've learned that so much. In fact, you know, like when I was in graduate school, I had a professor that told me, and it's very true. Whatever you do, do not make assumptions. Don't make them because you'll be incorrect. And then, you know, like through my transitions and through the work that I've done, I realized that the only time that it's appropriate to use assumptions is when you're doing research or when you're working, you know, like within the scientific method, because there's certain times in which you have to have assumptions in order to move forward in research. But outside of that, in personal life, we are 90% inaccurate. And so I've really tried to really hone in, but I do get caught up on occasion with it. I just kind of gave an example when we were going to go out of town, and, you know, like I failed to communicate. You know, like that is my bad because I had that assumption carry that communication. And Emma, you also talked about it as well, that sometimes assumptions can also get connected with those expectations. And then those expectations can kind of go back to that emotional scoreboard thing. So, I mean, there's all of these things that, you know, like we ought to, need to, should, you know, like pay attention to and be more mindful of where we are in the present, you know, like, so, you know, like one of the big things that can counteract assumptions is communication. Just talk about it. Don't make an assumption, you know, like communicate very clearly, you know, like what it is that is bothering you, what's on your mind, you know, like what's going on, because the other person is not always going to pick it up. Making sure that if we forget to communicate something and we're making an assumption, to not make that quantum leap over into the expectation that we have. Well, you should have known. How many times has anybody said that? You should have known this. Or, you know, like how many years have we been married, or how long have we been together, or how many times have we gone through that? You know, all of that, all of those conversations. And then, yep, don't worry about it. I will do it. It's just easier for me to do it instead of having you do it. It's just going to take longer. We're both mad. I'll just do it. So, you know, like all of these different kinds of things and how they play themselves out.
I definitely do that too. Like I'll sacrifice, like I'll know in the moment the best thing is to talk about what's going on in my head, but I'll sacrifice that conversation for peace. I'm like, if I know if I bring this up right now because I'm feeling roused up and I'm not calm, it's going to come out probably not the way I intended it to. And it's probably going to be an argument. So sometimes I sacrifice that communication and I just I'm like, you know what? I'll just do it. I'll just take care of it. I'll do it the way I like to do it and it'll just be done. However, on the back end, like I think that invisible scoreboard, that tick still goes up. So even though in the moment you choose peace, that scoreboard still ticks up and you still have this little bit of resentment, anger, whatever it is. For me, I don't know if this is for anybody else, but for me, it still just rises just a little bit. And so it's like, how many more ticks does it take until it just gets really ugly? So it's like, I have to do a better job of in the moment being prepared for maybe a little bit of ugly and maybe a little bit of uncomfortability and maybe a little bit of talking back and forth versus a really big, ugly, nasty argument in the end if I don't squash it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll take that moment and choose peace, but I'll come back to it later instead of letting it just add onto the scoreboard. Like later that night, once I'm a little more calm, I'll be like, we need to talk about earlier because I'm the same way. If I build up, it's like it's going to get ugly instead of just being a conversation. But I also don't want to say it right there in the moment because I'm pissed off and I'm not always the nicest when I'm in that mood, you know?
Yes. And I think maybe that's a maturity thing, like for you guys, because like you can come back and just say like, oh, okay, I'm calm now. Let's talk about it. But for me, I feel like I'm just so mad for like days. So maybe I'm just like not quite there yet. I need to just be, do a better job of just checking in with myself. But it's really hard for me to even like the same day go back to it without some sort of frustration kicking in or some sort of ugly coming out the way I don't want it to come out. So maybe it's just a young 20s thing and maybe in my 30s I'll be better about it. But just right now I'm just like, sometimes it takes me like days to just really think about it and really just think about how I want to say things and how I want to present myself. And sometimes I let a small problem become a big problem. Like if it's one small thing, I'll add in 10 other things that are still making me mad all at the same time. Yeah. I'm like, oh, and this and this and this when I'm really, really mad at this one thing. So I don't know. Do you guys have any tips on that? Like not letting just the whole can of worm just open up when you're feeling that way?
Nope, because I do that too.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah, it's like, what? While we're arguing here,
at it,
let me go back to that scoreboard real quick because I got a couple things.
Yeah. Yep.
I think that it's hard to avoid that, in all honesty, because we're all going to be there. But if we can slowly kind of change that and go back and talk about it, because one of the things that I've noticed is that when we do not communicate that scoreboard, that's when, like the palanthra of every offense that has happened, because resentment builds up. That's what it is. It's resentment. Now that I have your attention, I'm going to talk about this and this and this and this and this and this. But if you would go back, I love what you said earlier, Emma or Lindsey, or both of you, is about checking back in, like following up, maybe not in the moment, but if you can follow up, then, it's easier to just have a sense of resolve or peace because you've talked about it. And then it's a lot easier not to let it build up to that resentment. And then you just wait for that moment, that argument or whatever, when everything's brought up. But, sometimes, like even under the best of circumstances, it's still going to show up. But I'm hoping that can be an exception and not a rule, because I see how it plays itself out with so many patients that I work with that have relationship challenges, issues, conflicts, and so on and so forth. It's that they don't go back and they don't check in with one another. They don't talk about it. And so then those resentments just kind of go into holding in, and holding in comes with lashing out and disconnection and all kinds of things end up, tearing people apart from one another. What about projection? Sometimes projection, like, so we talked about expectations, talked about assumptions. What about, the projections that we make, that adds to stress, what we think somebody else should be aware of, like, if you have a sink full of dirty dishes,
Yeah, I think
you're
that kind of taps back into what I was saying earlier about me thinking that they should just know what I need when I
mm-hmm,
need it. Like, as far as
mm-hmm,
helping goes, it's not me saying, "Hey, could someone do the dishes tonight?" It's me coming home and being like, "I can't believe these dishes have sat here and nobody thought to do them," instead of me just asking. I'm like, okay, well, I guess now I'm going to do the dishes and the laundry and cook dinner and all these other things I had on
mm-hmm.
my plate.
Hey, how does that show up at work?
Let me talk about it. And this is not just this is not just in my previous role, but this is, I think, that I've seen since I started working. And I've been in the workforce for about 10-ish years, for about a decade now.
Mm-hmm.
And constantly, like, you're keeping your scoreboard at work, right? You're comparing yourself to your coworkers, to your boss. Like, I do this and this and this every day. My boss does this, my coworker does this. And a lot of times that I have found is some people will work their butt off and do the most and then get recognized the least. And it's the people with, like, the last name, or the people that have been there the longest, or the that are friends with the boss, or whatever the issue may be. That's pretty widespread. Like, you go above and beyond for these people, for them to just not really care about you, not recognize you, not see you for your value, not give you a raise or anything. So it's like, you try so hard to be the best you can be and go above and beyond and just do all you can do, sacrifice your time, and your schooling, everything, and you really give your all, just for someone else to just, your coworker, just to do half your work and get a raise the next month. It's just such a pisser offer. Like, I've been in that situation before where I'm just like, I'm doing everything I can possibly do, and the person that shows up late every day, and could care less and calls in sick twice a month, whatever the issue may be, is somehow more respected and higher up, or whatever the reason, because of their connections or whatever the reason. So sometimes the invisible scoreboard is so hard because you can't really talk about it at work. You can't just say, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I'm feeling upset because my coworker Jane Doe is not doing this and I'm doing this. Like, it's not, there's so many things at work you have to kind of keep to yourself. You have to be a professional. You can't just express yourself all the time in a business setting. So it's like, how do you correct that? And I think a lot of the time you have to realize, like, is the place I'm working at a reflective of me? Are they respecting me for what I am, who I am, the schooling, the hard work that I put in? Are they reciprocating that for me, or are they not? And then you have to really think about it and put yourself in a situation where you decide, are there opportunities that are better for me? And for me personally, I can say, yeah, like, my job right now, I love my job. I'm so well appreciated for my work. I'm constantly, being, lifted up with my coworkers and my boss, and I'm being challenged, and I'm being, corrected when I need to be. But it's so nice, because in a lot of places, especially for younger people, I've seen, they get taken advantage of. So that
Mm-hmm.
scoreboard just doesn't even matter. Have you guys noticed anything like that?
I actually have the opposite argument for you, Emma, because
No way.
I, being someone who's been in my career for 16 years and has done all these different positions, and I've been through every nook and cranny of my career. Now that I do less dogs, I could see, younger groomers being like, well, why is she being paid more than I am? I'm being paid for my experience, my tenure, my resume. I've put 16 years into this. If you've got 3 under your belt, like, yeah, I'm going to be making more money than you. Now, I don't think you should be getting ripped off. You should definitely be getting paid your worth, but it's not fair for them to compare themselves to me when, like I said, I've been at it for 16 years. So that and different jobs. I actually just had this conversation with one of our receptionists the other day, because we were just like joking banter back and forth, but I was like, I have too many jobs at work. And she turned around flabbergasted. Like she thought she was just the busiest person in the building. And I was like, I know you're busy. I said, but what you don't realize is that we're our own groomers, receptionists, and technicians. Like we do everything on our own over there. And I could tell she was kind of like, oh, yeah, because what they see is that we leave earlier than them. What they don't see is that we're on our feet for 8, 9, 10 hours a day and we don't stop. We're go, 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 go. So I think it's just it's definitely a projection thing. And I think people definitely should stop doing it. I think you should break it down instead of comparing, back to what you said. Are they paying you your worth? Are you being recognized for this instead of comparing yourself to someone who's maybe been doing it twice as long,
But yeah, I think it depends. I'm so glad that you had that experience because there's a lot of people, Lindsey, that don't have the experiences that other people have. And for me, I've done both. I can definitely relate to Emma's story where I was the first one in, the last one out, I took my job seriously and, people were getting promoted left and right, around me. I mean, I just couldn't win for losing. And I got really frustrated, with that. So, I was also in a different industry too. I was in criminal justice, at the early part of my career. And that was very male dominant. So, some of the pressures that I had in my career was that I had to fight to find a place and I had to work harder for respect, in a criminal justice industry back in the 80s and 90s. And, that was really very, very challenging, because I didn't get the recognition that I felt like I earned or that I deserved. But I did get a plethora of recognition by certain people because of my hard work. And I was very appreciative. And maybe that has a lot to do with why eventually I ended up just opening up my own clinic. I could be my own boss and I could do things the way that because I have very high standards. I do. I have very high standards. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think that there's anything wrong with having high standards, but, the sky's the limit, for me. And I'm the only one that places those limitations now because I can do whatever I choose to do. I can work hard. I can be recognized. I can do things that, if I were employed, I wouldn't ever be able to do or achieve. But, here's the other thing. And I don't think that this is just me, but there's been a couple of times when I was like, well, it's very, very difficult and challenging to be self-employed. And so I have taken an opportunity to have job interviews and just to see what's out there. And the problem is that I know what my worth is, just like Lindsey, you know what your worth is. And Emma, you're getting an idea on what your worth is. And I know how much I earn, and that doesn't cross translate to an employer, especially at my age. I don't know if that's true for everybody across the board, but I had a job interview a couple of years ago just to kind of put my name in the hat with something. And I gave them, what my salary expectations were. And they're just like, yeah, we can't do that. I'm like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, the job I'm in now, I actually took a pay cut when I took
really?
it. Yeah, I took a pretty significant pay cut, but it was something I was willing to, I knew about and was willing to do because the job offered me more flexibility. So before I was commuting almost an hour to work, I worked evenings, nights, weekends, swing shift. It was different hours all the time. Holidays, had to work that too. Now I work 7:30 till whenever I'm done for the day. I don't work weekends. I don't work holidays, So there was give and take, but definitely when I was interviewing for it, the owner was like, wow, that's what you're making right now. She's like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to match that. And I'm like, well, I was like, that's the bare minimum of, my worth in the field. So,
one of that kind of comes into play because I had a lunch with a friend of mine the other day, and they've worked, for larger employers. And, we were having a conversation about how sometimes employers, put a lot on a person and they're looking for a certain personality trait, and if you give it to them, they may not reciprocate in return. So, you may have to work harder and harder. And if you're a person that doesn't like to leave the job until the job's done, and then something happens, and, there's a staff shortage, for example, somebody quits, and, if there's other people to take on, the workload, employers, I have found, they won't replace that person. They'll just, kind of ride on the tails of the person who's working hard because, they don't need to. And the hard part is that there's not always that reciprocity back. It's not like you get a raise all the time. It's not that you get that recognition all the time. Sometimes it happens, but a lot of the times, at least and I've worked with a lot of people over the course of my career. And I would like to think that I have a pretty random selection of people. I've listened to, or observed my fair share of toxic environments.
Oh yeah.
Work environments. Horrible. So I think it's important to set those boundaries.
I would agree.
Yeah, I think when you're younger, I know even a few years ago, like you're fresh out of college or even fresh out of high school or whatever the situation, you're younger and you just want to make money. So for a while, a lot of people just take whatever crap they're given because they think that's normal. So they get treated really poorly. And I'm not talking about like at any job, you got to start somewhere. Like you got to start bottom level. Like you have to, earn your way up. You got to do your thing. But there's a line that's crossed when employers, like you said, Wendie, can be toxic and just kind of treat you unfairly. And, there's some red flags, definitely. Even if you're in your 20s, like there are some red flags to pay attention to. Like at the end of the day, you're still a person and your time is valuable. Your intelligence and your work ethic is valuable, even if you're young and starting out. So my advice, even if you are in your 20s and you're just starting out or whatever your case may be, stick up for yourself. You are worth a lot. You have a lot to bring to the table. Do not let someone belittle you or make you feel small in the workplace. And just pay attention to the signs. Like there's a lot of opportunities out there. Keep looking if it's not the right place for you. I don't know. That might be tougher and tougher as you stay in one spot or stay in one career field. It's harder to jump, but while you're younger and you're still experimenting, like it's okay to, think like revisit your options. I don't know. Maybe like it's harder as you get older, but I don't know.
I don't know. If you're in a toxic work environment, you need to put your foot down on that for sure. You need to, that can't happen.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to stand up for yourself.
That is so true, but but in the moment, we get caught up with so many things, we rely on that paycheck because that's our livelihood. And there's so many different reasons why we don't do what is actually the thing that a person should do. That kind of is those interferences within the context. It makes it really, really hard. But I would say that, it's important for anybody to make sure that they have work-life balance. If you find yourself working longer hours, and if you're, picking up more things because at first, it's very subtle. At first, it's more like you feel like your employer's recognizing your hard work and your dependability and all of those different kinds of things. And so who wouldn't want, that extra, acknowledgement or that extra perk because you think it's going to get you somewhere. But, like the moment that you realize that you're putting in more and more work, is the time to recognize that it's important to put in some kind of boundary. And maybe you just take baby steps into what those boundaries are going to look like. I had a conversation with somebody about a month ago, and I said, okay, you're here until like 6:30, 7:00. You're really working to find yourself burnt out, and that's not healthy for you. So, like, what would be your ideal time to leave? Well, if I get in at 7:00 or 8:00 in the morning, I'd like to leave at 5:00 in the evening. Okay, so, but what is your earliest that you feel comfortable with leaving, given that circumstance? Well, maybe 5:30 or 6:00. Well, that's an hour earlier than what maybe perhaps they were doing. So it's like, okay, what about if you give yourself permission to set a new boundary, and no matter what's going on, you put it down, you write it down so that it's the first thing that you pick up the next day, but you leave at 5:30 at least once a week, and then you build on that, and maybe you kind of work yourself back to 5:00 every day, because if your employer knows that you're a person that's just going to continue to work, your employee is going to take advantage of that. I've just seen that time and time again. I'm not saying that all employers are like that, but there's a plethora of them out there that do take
there should
advantage of
definitely
people.
be a class on how
Yes.
to professionally tell someone to get bent, because that's
Yes.
really what it comes down
Yes.
to. Is you need to keep records if you can, keep a paper trail, and maintain your professionalism. And you can do all of those
Yes.
things while still standing up for yourself. And then if they do try to retaliate against you, well, I maintained my professionalism, this, and this happened, and I have it documented. So I don't know, I feel like it could erase some
Yes, that would be
anxiety.
a wonderful like high school or college edition to like when people like teach interviews or what to wear or just basic job, necessities. I think it'd be so important to role play how to professionally and respectfully say no, how to set boundaries in the workplace. Because when you're fresh starting out, when you are so young and so naive, and when someone's like being nice to you and they have a position of power over you, how do you respectfully stand up for yourself? How do you respectfully say no? Because it's so hard in the moment, because you want to be seen as a hard worker, you want to be seen as professional, but it's hard because eventually your boundary is going to get crossed. If you keep being the yes man, like you said, Wendie, eventually the boundary is gonna get crossed. So how in the world, in the moment, especially if you're someone that has a tendency to be a people pleaser, like I'm definitely that way, that is always saying yes, how and when to say no? What's the right way to do it? How do you professionally do that? It is tough. I think even with practice it's tough, but it's something definitely that's important.
It's an intimidating thing to stand in front of your boss and correct them or tell them no. But you can do those things. That your boss is not the end all be all. You can do those things. You just have to make sure you do it professionally. You obviously can't go in there cussing people out and throwing a hissy fit, but you can absolutely say, no, I won't be doing that. This is
right, for sure. Well, maybe that's something that we can do. We can evolve into something like that. Maybe we should do a workshop, when we get a little bit more established about how to say it in the workplace. But, like, I would just want to say that I don't think that it's just something that happens in your 20s, 30s, or I think it can happen at any time. I do believe that, like when you age and you go through like the different stages, no matter if it's in parenthood or if it's in relationships or if it's in the workplace, I think that there are challenges on knowing how to say it and being comfortable with being able to say it.
So we've been talking for about an hour, so I think it's a good time to kind of wrap it up. But I wanted to tell our viewers that our website is finally live. So tune into agesandstagespod.com. You can find a little bit more about us as hosts, some merchandise that's coming soon, just a link to see all of our podcasts. Feel free to submit a question or a story, and we'd love to hear from you and get back to you. So please check that out. We'd love to hear from you and see what you have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining in for another episode of Ages and Stages. Remember to always bring balance into your life, and stick with my motto, like work hard, relax hard. Until the next time.
Bye.
Have a good week, guys. Bye.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Ages and Stages. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with a friend who might need it too. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can follow us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube for more behind-the-scenes moment and updates between episodes. Wherever you are in life, your stage matters, and we're so glad you're here. We'll see you next time.